They are on the front lines, and they're the people you see the most if you ever wind up in the hospital. I'm talking, of course, about the nurses. Got a lot of secrets about what they see and stories about what they have to do and deal with. Well, a new book called The Nurses, A Year of Secrets, Drama, and Miracles with the Heroes of the Hospital. It talks about all of that and more. A short time ago, I spoke to its author, Alexandra Robbins. Well, give an idea of the nurses in the 4 hospitals. I know you obviously changed the names of both the nurses and the hospitals, but give an idea of the gamut of the hospitals and the people you profiled.
Yeah, what I did was, to make it a fun read, I followed 4 nurses throughout a year, people whose stories readers would really root for, and they're in different hospitals. They're in a city hospital, there's a hospital in an impoverished neighborhood, there's a ritzy hospital, there's a very academically prestigious hospital, just to find out if nurses were going through the same thing across the country. And they are. Nurses across the country really need our help. They need us to appreciate them more, and they need us to realize that they're the unsung heroes of the hospital.
You know, like many, I've got either family or relationships with people that work in the medical community, including on the nursing and also in the doctor end. And it really varies, doesn't it, depending on the hospital, both what's expected of the nurses and also the demand. I mean, in ORs, ERs, specialty nurses, there's always a huge demand for them. But if you're young trying to get into the business, for example, in New York City, in our viewing area, you can't be a rookie nurse here. You got to have experience before you get to one of the bigger city hospitals. Give an idea about the realities of the demands of nurses getting into the field, and once they're in the field, their pick of choices where they can go.
Well, you know, one thing that really surprised me was that California is the only state in the country that has safe staffing nurse-patient ratio laws. What that means is that other hospitals, including in this region, aren't hiring enough nurses to cover the patient load. So the nurses who are working there are often overloaded with more patients than is safe. That not only affects the nurses' jobs, as you were talking about, it also affects the public, because when patients are with a nurse who have more patients than the safe maximum, they're more likely to die, suffer complications, or infections.
In terms of the hours, you were talking about 12 and 14-hour shifts. How much of that, though, Alexandra, is choices by the nursing management? Because you work 3 days on, you get 4 days off. Some people want those compressed schedules. Do the nurses have their own voices in terms of picking their own schedules?
It depends on the nurse, and it depends on the hospital. One of the reasons I wrote this book was because nurses do not have enough of a voice. I think they're ignored too much. But what happens during those shifts, even if the nurses choose them, is not all hospitals give them breaks. Not all hospitals give them time to eat, to take a walk, even to go to the bathroom. So when you're hearing 12 to 14 hours, for some nurses, that is on their feet, lifting, moving for so many hours without a stop. And that's hard. That's hard for nurses, and it's not good for the patients.
Of the nurses you spoke to, I know you profiled these, but you spoke to certainly a great deal more than the ones that were profiled in depth. Did you get the impression that they wanted more authority, or that too much was put on them in terms of their role, whether with dealing with patient care, whether it be in the ER? Give an idea here. Is too much on their plate, or do they want more responsibility than they had?
Nurses can handle a lot. They can handle responsibility. Yes, they want more of a voice in decision-making. They want to be empowered in the workplace, and that's good for all of us. The problem is that hospitals keep trying to get more patients in without hiring enough nurses, and that's what's putting too much on a nurse's plate.
In terms of the relationships, what surprised me about this was more so than doctor versus nurse, nurse versus nurse. In terms of dynamics, there was even more problems within the nursing fraternity than necessarily from doctors to nurses.
Yeah, there's an expression in the nursing community, nurses eat their young. And in some places that's true, again, because they don't have many outlets in the workplace. So you can see why they might end up turning on each other. Interestingly, studies show that nurse bullying happens most frequently in hospitals that don't treat them right.
And finally, talk about that last secret, don't get sick in July.
Yeah, don't get sick in July. In teaching hospitals in July, the death rate spikes between 8 and 34%, because that's when medical students graduate and become residents. So nurses are important 12 months out of the year, but you really want them looking out for you in July because they catch some doctor mistakes.
Well, good to know. And there's a lot more in that. Again, the book, The Nurses. Alexandra Robbins, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up next, we'll have our Hudson Valley headlines.